Maria Thompson was an older woman, known and loved in her neighborhood. She had spent her life helping others, volunteering at local shelters, and offering a kind smile to everyone she met. Her spirit was strong, and her presence felt like a warm hug to the people in her community. That morning, she was on her way to the bakery down the street to pick up her usual loaf of bread and a treat for herself. It was one of her small joys, walking through the city she had called home for decades. On the same street, Rebecca Collins was storming down the sidewalk. She was in her mid-30s, carrying frustration in every step. Her life felt like it was falling apart. Her job was demanding, her bills were piling up, and every little thing seemed to irritate her. But her anger wasn't just about her personal struggles. Deep down, she had always carried an ugliness inside, a prejudice she never confronted but often let out in small, cruel ways. The street was busy, full of life. People bustled around, chatting, laughing, and going about their day. Maria moved carefully, her cane tapping lightly against the pavement. Rebecca, on the other hand, wasn't paying attention. Her phone buzzed with notifications, her arms were full of bags, and her mind was somewhere else entirely. It happened so fast. Rebecca didn't see Maria in front of her, and the two collided. Maria stumbled back, catching herself on her cane, while Rebecca's bags tumbled to the ground. Instead of apologizing, Rebecca exploded in anger. "Watch where you're going, old lady," she snapped, her voice cutting through the chatter of the street. Maria, calm and composed, replied, "I'm sorry, dear, but you bumped into me." That response only made Rebecca angrier. She stepped closer, towering over Maria. "You think you're better than me. You think you can just stand there and talk back." Her words turned uglier, laced with racial slurs. The crowd began to notice the commotion. People slowed down, some stopping entirely to see what was happening. Maria held her ground. She wasn't someone who backed down easily, not after everything she had endured in her life. She looked Rebecca in the eye and said firmly, "I won't let you speak to me that way." That was the moment Rebecca lost control. Without thinking, she raised her hand and slapped Maria across the face. The sound echoed, and the street went silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd as everyone froze, unsure of what would happen next. But Maria wasn't a woman who stayed down. With a speed and strength that surprised everyone, including Rebecca, Maria swung back. Her punch landed squarely, and Rebecca stumbled, nearly falling to the ground. The crowd erupted into cheers and shouts, some pulling out their phones to record what had just happened. Rebecca's face turned red with shock and embarrassment. She couldn't believe what had just occurred. The elderly woman she had looked down on had stood up for herself, and won. Maria stood tall, her eyes fierce. She didn't say another word. She simply turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving Rebecca to deal with the weight of her actions. Maria's hand still stung as she walked away, but her heart was steady. She had never imagined herself throwing a punch, much less in the middle of a crowded street. Yet, she felt no regret. For too long, people like Rebecca had spoken down to her, treated her as less, and expected her to remain silent. Today, she had shown otherwise. The crowd buzzed behind her as she continued down the street. People were still talking about what had happened, their voices a mix of shock, admiration, and curiosity. Some followed Rebecca, who was still standing there, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. Others tried to catch up with Maria, wanting to thank her or ask her how she felt. But Maria didn't stop. She needed a moment to herself. Rebecca, meanwhile, was furious. She couldn't believe that an elderly woman had punched her, and in front of so many people. Her chest burned with embarrassment as she glanced at the onlookers, many of whom were recording her on their phones. The humiliation of it all was unbearable. "What are you all staring at?" she snapped, her voice shaking. She bent down to grab her scattered bags, but the crowd wasn't on her side. One man, standing near the edge of the group, spoke up. "You got what you deserved," he said plainly, crossing his arms. A few others nodded in agreement. Rebecca's mouth fell open, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. Deep down, part of her knew they were right, but she wasn't ready to admit it. Instead, she stormed off, her steps quick and uneven, her bag swinging wildly at her sides. Maria finally stopped walking when she reached a small park nearby. She sat down on a bench, her cane resting against her leg. Her mind replayed the moment over and over again, from Rebecca's angry words to the shock on her face after Maria had struck back. It was both surreal and satisfying. As she sat there, an older man approached her cautiously. He had been in the crowd earlier and had seen everything. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I just wanted to say that was something. You stood up for yourself in a way most people wouldn't have." Maria smiled at him, her expression warm but tired. "Thank you," she said. "I don't believe in violence, but sometimes enough is enough." The man nodded, tipping his hat before walking away. Maria took a deep breath, letting the calm of the park settle her nerves. Elsewhere, Rebecca was pacing her apartment, her emotions a storm of anger, shame, and disbelief. The red mark on her cheek had faded, but her humiliation had not. She picked up her phone, scrolling through social media only to find the video of the incident had already been uploaded. It was spreading fast, and the comments were brutal. Serves her right. Finally, someone stood up to a bully like her. This is what happens when you think you can treat people any way you want. Rebecca's hands trembled as she threw her phone onto the couch. The world wasn't on her side, and it stung more than the punch itself. She didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. Her life wasn't going to be the same after this. The next morning, Maria woke up to find her phone buzzing nonstop. She didn't usually check it first thing, but the sound was too much to ignore. When she finally looked, she was surprised to see dozens of messages from friends, neighbors, and even people she hadn't spoken to in years. "Maria, is this really you in the video?" One message read, with a link attached. Another said, "You're trending. Everyone's talking about what you did." Maria hesitated for a moment, then clicked the link. The video showed the moment Rebecca hit her, followed by Maria's unexpected punch. It was all there, the shock of the crowd, the cheers, and even the way Maria had walked away afterward. She felt her cheeks flush as she watched. The video had already been shared thousands of times, with comments pouring in from people around the world. Some praised Maria's courage, calling her a hero, while others debated whether violence was ever the answer. Maria shook her head and set her phone down. She didn't want to be a viral sensation. She just wanted to live her life in peace. Meanwhile, Rebecca was having a very different morning. She had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts about the video. By now, almost everyone she knew had seen it. Her coworkers, her boss, even her parents had called to ask her what had happened. She checked her phone, hoping the storm had died down, but it was worse than ever. News outlets had picked up the story, and Rebecca's name was now attached to headlines calling her the racist woman who got punched by an elderly lady. Her email inbox was flooded with messages, some from strangers condemning her behavior, and a few from people offering support, but the support felt hollow, and the hate was overwhelming. Rebecca's boss had left a voicemail asking her to come into the office immediately. She played it back, her hands shaking. "We need to talk about this situation," her boss had said. "This doesn't reflect well on the company." She didn't need to hear more. Rebecca knew what was coming. By midday, she was sitting in her boss's office, staring at the floor as he explained how her actions had damaged the company's reputation. "We can't keep you on staff," he said firmly. "I'm sorry, Rebecca, but this is the only option." Rebecca didn't argue. She didn't even have the energy to fight back. Losing her job felt like the final blow in a day that had already crushed her spirit. As Rebecca left the office, she passed by a group of her former coworkers. They whispered among themselves, their eyes darting toward her, but quickly looking away. The humiliation was unbearable. That evening, Rebecca sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through the comments on the video again. She wanted to turn it off, to throw her phone away, but she couldn't stop. One comment caught her eye. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for her. It's never too late to change. For the first time since the incident, Rebecca felt something shift inside her. She didn't know what it was yet. Anger, regret, or something else. But it was enough to make her pause. Maria wasn't the type to dwell on drama, but it seemed like the drama wasn't ready to leave her alone. The video kept spreading, and by now, even local news stations were covering it. People were calling her a hero, a symbol of standing up against injustice. Some even wanted to interview her. Her doorbell rang in the late afternoon. When she opened it, she found a group of neighbors standing there. One of them was a young woman named Jasmine, who Maria had seen grow up over the years. Jasmine was holding a tray of cookies, smiling nervously. "We just wanted to check on you, Miss Thompson," Jasmine said. "We saw the video. How are you feeling?" Maria chuckled softly. "I'm fine, dear. A little tired of all the attention, but I'm fine." The neighbors stayed for a while, talking about what had happened. Many of them shared their own stories about racism or times when they wished they'd stood up for themselves. Maria listened carefully, nodding and offering words of encouragement. She hadn't realized how much the incident meant to so many people. Meanwhile, Rebecca's world continued to crumble. She had spent most of the day avoiding her phone, but her curiosity got the better of her. She opened a news app, and there it was, a headline that felt like a punch to her gut. "Elderly woman teaches racist a lesson. Viral video sparks national debate." Rebecca didn't even read the article. She closed the app and stared at the wall. Everything felt unreal, like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. As the day went on, Rebecca's frustration turned inward. She thought about what had happened, replaying the moment in her mind. She had been angry, sure, but was she really so wrong? Then she remembered the look on Maria's face, the calm strength in her eyes, even after Rebecca had hit her. Rebecca couldn't shake that image. It made her feel small, like she was the one who had been put in her place. That evening, she received a call from her best friend, Amanda. They hadn't spoken in weeks, but Amanda had obviously seen the video. "What were you thinking, Rebecca?" Amanda asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You can't just go around hitting people, especially someone like her." "I don't know," Rebecca admitted, her voice trembling. "I just lost control." "You need to fix this," Amanda said firmly. "You messed up, and people are angry. But if you show them you're willing to change, maybe they'll give you another chance." Rebecca didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear this, but she couldn't ignore the truth in Amanda's words. The next day, Rebecca did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the library. She didn't know where to start, but she knew she needed to learn, to understand what had brought her to this point. She picked up books about racism and bias, feeling awkward and out of place. As she sat in the quiet corner of the library, Rebecca felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe she could change. Maybe it wasn't too late to become someone better. Maria's life had always been peaceful, but now it felt like she was in the center of a storm. People kept recognizing her wherever she went. At the bakery, the clerk refused to take her money, saying, "This one's on the house, Miss Thompson. You're an inspiration to all of us." Maria smiled politely, but felt a little overwhelmed. All she had done was defend herself, yet people were treating her like a hero. She appreciated the kindness, but wished things would go back to normal. That afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor. A young reporter knocked on her door, holding a notepad and looking nervous. "Miss Thompson, I'm from the local paper. Do you have a moment to talk?" Maria hesitated but decided to let the reporter in. She offered him tea as he sat at her kitchen table, fumbling with his pen. "I wanted to hear your side of the story," he said. "You've become a symbol for standing up against hate. How does that feel?" Maria thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't set out to be a symbol," she said. "I just reacted to a moment. I don't believe in violence, but sometimes silence isn't an option either. I hope this makes people think about how they treat each other." The reporter nodded, scribbling down her words. Before he left, he thanked her for her time and promised to write the story with care. While Maria was reflecting on how her life had changed, Rebecca was confronting her own reality. After spending hours at the library the previous day, she had gone home with a heavy heart. The books she read were opening her eyes in ways she hadn't expected. She was starting to see how her actions were part of something much bigger, a cycle of prejudice and anger that hurt everyone involved. Rebecca knew she couldn't undo what she had done, but she wanted to make amends. That morning, she wrote a letter to Maria. It wasn't easy. She crumpled up at least 3 drafts before she found the right words. "Dear Miss Thompson, I owe you an apology. My behavior toward you was inexcusable, and I deeply regret my actions. I acted out of anger and ignorance, and I understand now how much harm I caused, not just to you, but to everyone who saw what happened. I am committed to learning and becoming a better person. I hope one day you can forgive me. Sincerely, Rebecca Collins." She sealed the letter in an envelope and walked to Maria's neighborhood. Standing in front of the house, her hands trembled. She thought about knocking, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she slid the letter through the mail slot and hurried away. When Maria found the letter later that day, she was surprised. She read it carefully, her heart softening as she reached the end. She didn't know if Rebecca was sincere, but the effort meant something. Maria placed the letter on her kitchen table, deciding to think about how to respond. As the sun set, both women found themselves reflecting on the same question. What does it take to truly move forward? Maria sat at her kitchen table, the letter from Rebecca resting in front of her. She had read it twice already, and each time it stirred something different in her. Part of her was still angry. Rebecca had humiliated her in public, struck her without a second thought, and had only written the letter because she'd been exposed. But another part of Maria, the part that had always tried to see the best in people, wondered if Rebecca's words were sincere. She sipped her tea, letting her thoughts settle. Maria had spent her life standing strong in the face of adversity. Forgiving someone like Rebecca wasn't easy, but she knew carrying anger could weigh her down more than the incident itself. The next morning, Maria decided to take action. She wrote her own letter, careful to choose her words thoughtfully. "Dear Rebecca, thank you for your letter. I appreciate that you took the time to write it and reflect on your actions. It is not easy to admit when we are wrong, and I hope this moment marks a new beginning for you. I have lived through many experiences where I had to endure prejudice and judgment. What happened between us was painful, but it also reminded me that people can change if they choose to. I hope you use this opportunity to grow and to be kinder, not just to others, but to yourself as well. Sincerely, Maria Thompson." Maria folded the letter neatly and placed it in an envelope. She walked to Rebecca's apartment, which she had looked up in the directory. Standing in front of the door, she hesitated for a moment, then slid the letter under the door. With a deep breath, she turned and walked away. When Rebecca found the letter later that day, she was stunned. She hadn't expected a response, and certainly not one so thoughtful. She read it slowly, feeling a strange mix of emotions: relief, shame, and even gratitude. Maria's words were firm but forgiving, offering Rebecca a chance to change without excusing her behavior. Rebecca sat down with the letter, her mind racing. She thought about her own life, the choices she'd made, and the person she had become. For so long, she had blamed others for her problems, refusing to look inward. But now she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. That evening, Rebecca took another step. She signed up for a community workshop on understanding bias, something she never would have considered before. She didn't tell anyone about it. She wasn't doing it for recognition. She was doing it because it felt like the right thing to do. As the days passed, the video of the incident began to lose its momentum online. New stories replaced it, and the world moved on. But for Maria and Rebecca, the impact lingered. Maria found herself thinking less about the punch and more about the courage it had taken to forgive. Rebecca, on the other hand, found herself questioning everything she once believed, slowly reshaping her perspective. Both women knew their paths wouldn't cross again anytime soon, but the moment they had shared continued to ripple through their lives. It had started with anger and violence, but had turned into something neither of them had expected. A chance to learn, grow, and begin again. Weeks had passed since the incident, but its lessons lingered in the lives of both women. For Maria, life was finally returning to normal. The attention had died down, and she was grateful for the peace. She could walk to the grocery store without people stopping her, though a few still whispered, "That's her," as she passed. Maria had always been a strong woman, but this experience had reminded her of something important. Strength wasn't just about standing up for yourself. It was also about knowing when to let go of anger. Rebecca's letter had been a turning point, not because it erased what happened, but because it showed Maria that change was possible, even in someone like her. One afternoon, Maria found herself at the community center where she volunteered. It was her favorite place to spend time, helping organize meals and activities for people in need. That day, as she worked, a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Miss Thompson?" the woman asked. "Yes, dear," Maria said, turning to her with a warm smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice soft but steady. "What you did, standing up for yourself like that, it inspired me. I've always been scared to speak out when I see injustice, but after seeing you, I realized I can't stay silent anymore." Maria reached out and gently patted the woman's hand. "I'm glad it inspired you," she said. "But remember, true strength isn't about fighting. It's about standing firm in your values and treating people with kindness, even when it's hard." The young woman nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. Maria felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. Maybe the incident had been painful, but if it had helped even one person find their voice, it had been worth it. Rebecca, meanwhile, was navigating her own journey. The workshop on understanding bias had been eye-opening. Sitting in a room full of people from different backgrounds, she had listened to stories that broke her heart and challenged her assumptions. For the first time in her life, Rebecca felt truly ashamed, not in the self-pitying way she had before, but in a way that made her want to change. She realized how much harm she had caused, not just to Maria, but to others she had judged unfairly over the years. Rebecca started small. She volunteered at a local shelter, serving meals to people she had once ignored. She signed up for more workshops and began reading books about empathy and understanding. Slowly, she began to rebuild herself. One day, Rebecca wrote a second letter to Maria. This time, it wasn't an apology, it was a thank you. "Dear Ms. Thompson, I wanted to thank you again, not just for your forgiveness, but for showing me what strength looks like. You didn't just stand up to me. You showed me a better way to live. I'm working to be a better person, and it's because of you. With gratitude, Rebecca Collins." Maria received the letter on a quiet morning. As she read it, a small smile spread across her face. She folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer with the first letter. For both women, the incident had become a turning point. Maria continued her work at the community center, spreading kindness wherever she went. Rebecca worked hard to undo years of prejudice, one step at a time. Though their paths never crossed again, they had each taken something valuable from the encounter. It was a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there is always a chance to choose understanding, growth, and a better way forward.